Hey guys, Charles Yeager for Tuts Plus. Today we're going to take a look at how to create a double exposure image using 3D models. Recently I was experimenting with some double exposure photography, and although it can be really fun, it can take a lot of work to set up a white background and mount up a bunch of camera flashes to get the look you really want. Then I came across a commercial for the Xbox One titled Greatest Games, and this features some amazing double exposure shots using game footage and fully CG characters. The commercial was made by a creative company called Blind, and I'll have links for everything on the blog post of this tutorial. This sparked my interest for creating some cool double exposure shots using only 3D models and scenes, or even doing some shots with a mixture of 3D and actual photographs. So in this tutorial, I'm going to go through and kind of show you the process of how I created some of these double exposure shots. I'm going to be doing everything in After Effects with the plugin Element 3D, but really we're focusing more on the process of how this was done, so you can follow along with any 3D program you prefer, such as 3ds Max, Cinema 4D, or Blender. And you could also do your image blending in Photoshop if you're not as familiar with After Effects. Alright, let's get started. Alright, so now we're in After Effects. What we need to do is we need to create two different scenes that we're going to combine to be one double exposure image. And the first scene I like to start out with is kind of the outline image. So in this case, I'm using R2-D2. And this model came from the free Star Wars pack from Video Copilot. I'll have a link for that in the description as well. And so I just go to a custom camera view here, and we can take a look around at what I've got set up. So really what I have is I have the After Effects camera and just this model of R2-D2 and nothing on the background. I do have an environment map on him. You can see in the reflections there, but you can't see it in the background of this image. So it's really just the model floating around in 3D space. I'll just turn on the transparency so you can see that. Turn that back off. Let's go back to our active camera view. So what I need to do is set up a light in this scene to kind of illuminate R2-D2 and give him some nice shadow fall off. So what I did was I created a spotlight, and I'll just go ahead and check that on. If I go back to the custom camera view, you can kind of see what this looks like. It's a very narrow light that I have just kind of pointing down on top of him, illuminating the front of him, and really doing some nice dark shadows on the back side. And you'll notice in the shadows, it's really pitch black. And the way that's done, you might have to tweak a setting in Element. I'll go ahead and show you that now. So if we come back to the active camera view, in order to get these really dark shadows, if I go to the element layer, we come down here in the element settings, under render settings, under physical environment, you're gonna wanna make sure the lighting influence is at 100%. On default, I think it's around 20. So if I bring this down, you can see what's happening here is the environment map that I have selected for this model is actually illuminating R2-D2 combined with our actual lights in After Effects. So that's why you can kind of see it's really reflective. I have the reflection cranked up really high on this, but that's again because I'm using this light influence at 100%. So if I pull this all the way back up to 100%, you can see wherever the spotlight's not shining on R2-D2, it is in the shadow and it will be pitch black. I'll just turn on the transparency here so you can kind of see the outline. So wherever he's pitch black, that's going to be where the transparent areas are on this double exposure image. And what I like about the spotlight, if I come down here and click on it and hit AA, you can change a lot of things such as the cone angle and the cone feather, so you can really fine tune and get the look you want on your models. And you can also control the cone feathering, get some nice fall off there. It's definitely important to have kind of some natural fall off because you don't want it to be too harsh of a transition, because again, this is where it's going to be kind of blending from our other image to R2-D2. But again, we want R2-D2 to serve as kind of the outline for everything. And right now, he just has a transparent background. So we need his background to be solid white. And we're going to kind of do a little bit of trickery here. We're not going to actually have this be in the 3D space. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new white solid. And I'm just going to name it BG for background. And I'll just select the color picker here, make sure it's solid white, and click OK. And we are just going to place this background behind everything. So it's behind our element layer. So now you can see we get this really nice contrasting outline of R2-D2 because we have this white background. And we can check that on and off. So any areas that are solid white will not be see-through at all. They won't have any transparency. So we won't have any transparency along the outline of R2-D2. So that'll help define that. And then we'll have just a little bit of subtle transparency here, kind of on his chest plate here where he's white. But any of these brighter areas are going to appear more solid, whereas the darker areas are going to be more transparent. And again, with a fully black area, will be completely transparent. So once you have your shot set up the way you like it, I definitely recommend going into Element and dialing up all your settings, such as your shadows, your ray trace ambient occlusion, anything like that you want to set it on. Right now, I've got mine set kind of at a preview mode, just so it'll be faster for this tutorial. But I definitely recommend setting the render mode all the way to full render. And then under super sampling, crank these up to about 2. And if you can, on your computer, using some enhanced multi-sampling, that'll just ensure you get some nice clean edges in here. It's going to be very important for our next step we do. But what we want to do is render out a high quality still frame of this scene That way when we use it later on, when we're blending the two shots together, After Effects isn't having to render everything involved with this Element 3D layer. It'll just make the blending process go a lot smoother and reduce the risk of having a crash. So in order to do that, make sure all of your settings are where you want them to be, and make sure you're on a full resolution preview, and just come up here with your composition selected, go to Composition, Save Frame As File, and that'll open up the render queue, and we can come down here and we can select a custom and go to Format and select PNG Sequence. And you can tweak things under format options if you need to. Just have the compression on none, click OK, and click OK. And then you can go ahead and save this out as a PNG image. So once you do that, just import that back into After Effects, and we'll be working with that a little bit later. So once you've done that, let's go ahead and jump into our second composition, which is going to be our second scene that we want to blend into things. And what I've got here is a composition with BB-8. I've got all of the element settings right now currently set on draft, just so we can preview this a little quicker. But if I go to a custom camera view, you can see it's just a scene of BB-8 in the corridor of the starship. And I'll just go back to the active camera. And after you get your scene set up, I definitely recommend bringing back in your base image, so in our case the R2-D2 image. And I'm just going to import this into the BB-8 composition. And we can go ahead and turn that on. And then we can set the mode here to screen. And that's going to kind of give us a quick preview of what we're going to be looking at a little bit later. So now we can align everything. So if I needed to now, I could select the camera. And I could kind of rotate around, align BB-8 up to where I want him to be for the final double exposure shot. And something else is pretty cool. On our secondary image here that has BB-8 in it, you can see on the light areas here where it's solid white, those are going to kind of blend nicely with the R2-D2 image because of the white background. But once we have everything aligned, we can go ahead and turn off that R2-D2 image. And now we can go ahead and tweak the settings of this second image. We need to dial everything back up again, and we're going to render out a still frame of this. So I'm going to select that Element 3D layer, set everything back to full render, and again, make sure you're previewing it at full resolution. And now if you need to come back in here and turn on any ray tracing or shadows, and also increase the super sampling. And once you've got your settings dialed in, you can go ahead and just select your BB-8 composition. Come here to Composition and just Save Frame As File. And we can come down here and save this out again as a PNG. So PNG Sequence, click OK. And you can name this and just render that out, and that'll render out another still frame of that composition. So now let's go ahead and look at how we can blend these two images together. All right, so what I've created is another composition called the blend composition. This is where I'm going to blend both of those images together and do some color correction, some fine tuning. So I've imported back in the BB-8 still image. I've added a glow to it to kind of give the nice glow to these lights behind him there. You can see when I check that on and off. And I went ahead and created some color correction and added in some film grain. So I'm going to go ahead and turn those layers on. And you can see I just added a little bit of subtle blue to the shadows and added in some film grain. It's going to give it a little bit of gritty detail, works well off the atmosphere of the glow, and just kind of matches the Star Wars aesthetic a little bit better. Then it's kind of some final fine-tuned treatment. I did a little bit more color correction, added a vignette, and also added in some chromatic abrasion. So I'm going to turn all of those on now too. And you can see with the chromatic abrasion, just adds a nice little blue areas to the highlights here and a little bit of red coming off the edge of BB-8. I'll have some links for some of these effects that I used in the description of this video if you're looking to check those out. Some of them are other third-party plugins, but they're not necessary to do this effect. It was really just kind of the creative look I was going for with this shot. So now we're ready to add in our R2-D2 image, and I'm going to go ahead and turn that on now. I've just imported that still image in. So what we need to do now is we need to set this R2-D2 image to a screen mode. This is kind of serving as our outline image for our double exposure shot. So I'll just come in here with that image selected and go to screen. And now you can see we're really getting that double exposure effect we're going for. And it looks quite nice because BB-8's right here revealed in the shadow area, and we kind of have this cool foreshadowing of R2-D2 and BB-8. What's also cool is you can see kind of the similarities of their face here with the eyes and the projector and everything. So overall, I feel that was a pretty cool look. And finally, just to do a little final color correction on this image, it was a little blue for me. It looked a little too sterile and clean, and I wanted to kind of add in a nice Star Wars faded look. So I just added a little bit of film emulation on top of everything, which again kind of gives it this kind of sun-faded double exposure look, sort of like something you would see on a poster or book cover, that type of thing. But again, it creates a really unique effect. I don't see this used too much on 3D models or completely 3D double exposure images. And it's cool because you can go in here and tweak a lot of things. You can experiment with different lighting setups and even quickly change out background images. So that's something I really like. So if I wanted to, I could just come in here. I've got another shot I could just drag in. And this is an actual photograph of a hillside. And I can just pull this down here and just add it above BB-8. So it's fun to just drag in different images. And this is an actual real photograph, so you can kind of blend the two together to create some unique looks. Now, one thing about this look, you can see R2-D2 is a little more difficult to see because there's not as much contrast on him. And in order to fix this, what I really recommend doing is jumping back into your base image here and adding more contrast into this and rendering it out. However, that adds a couple extra steps to the process. And if you just need kind of a quick fix, I'll go ahead and show you what you can do for that. So if we jump back over here to the blend composition, I'm going to select my R2-D2 image, and I'm just going to come up here and go to Effects, Color Correction Curves. And what we need to do is we need to add more contrast into this scene, particularly highlights. So I'm going to pull the highlights up here. And you can see how that makes the brights kind of stand out a little bit better. And I'm going to pull the shadows down a touch. So if I just check this on and off, you can see we're getting a little bit brighter image on R2-D2. Something else we can do is very simple. Just select your image and Control-D on a PC or Command-D on a Mac. We're going to duplicate that. And that's going to brighten things up a lot because now we have two different screen layers on top of each other. And I think that looks pretty good. Another trick you could do though is on this second one you created, set it to normal mode. You just hit T on the keyboard on that layer for opacity. I like to set this around 10 or 15%. And you can see that also gives us a nice blending style. One thing to note, if you do use this, it's going to darken up your background image a touch just because again it has 15% opacity and it is darker. So I'll just check that on and off so you can see that. But that's really the basis of how this double exposure effect is done. Let's go ahead and look at another quick example of a video clip that I did using two different video scenes. So if I've got this other scene I've got here, so I'm going to open up this composition of a skull. So what I've got here is a shot of a skull, again with Element 3D, illuminated by a spotlight. And I've got just a 2D white background here. But if I scroll through here, it's a little 4-second animation. You can see the skull rotates and then mouth opens up kind of off to the side. And so you can see the cranium here is in the really dark area of the shadow, so that's going to be the transparent area of this. And so for my other scene that I wanted to kind of shine through was a cityscape, and I'll open that up. So I've got this shot of a cityscape. It's being shot with a really long lens here to kind of compress everything down. I'm going to go ahead and turn off a few of these layers just so we can see this a little bit easier. I'm going to turn the shadows off on this. So if we just move through here, it's a little 4-second clip of this city. And you can see it's just a little bit of movement on the camera to give it some nice parallax, like it was shot with a helicopter or something like that. And with this look, I'm going for more of kind of a surreal look. So it's very saturated and really more of a motion graphic style as opposed to a photorealistic style. But let's go ahead and turn back on the shadow mapping and our ambient occlusion. And if you're doing this on yours, I definitely recommend using ray traced ambient occlusion. I'm just using the SSAO right now just for the sake of this tutorial. That way it loads quickly. So let's go ahead and jump into the blend composition. I'm going to go ahead and open that back up for the Skull City. And so what I've got here is I've imported in the city shot. And so you will have to actually import in the compositions here. And the render times can be a little bit longer because we are going to be rendering out two different instances of Element 3D that both potentially have ray tracing on them at the same time. So you will look at a little bit more of an increased render time. And it could add a little more strain to your computer. So you want to watch out for crashes, that type of thing. But I've got my shot of my city, and one thing you'll notice is the city doesn't actually cover up the entire scene. And that's okay though, because our skull is really just going to be right here in the center. So if I go ahead and turn that layer on, you can see it doesn't cover up everything, and really we're only going to see the city through this dark area of the skull. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to be a screen mode. And now we can kind of see through that, and we can kind of just scroll through here and you can kind of see the effect that's happening. It's pretty cool. I actually wanted the skull to stand out a little bit more, so I duplicated it and I set it to be at 10% opacity in normal mode, so we can see a little more detail kind of in the front of the skull here. The next step I did was added in some color correction and kind of some film contrast, so I increased the saturation on everything and then added in the contrast, and that also makes the skull kind of stand out a little bit more in the highlight areas. And for just finally, I added in another touch of film grain on top of this. I'll have links where you can download some free film grain on the tutorial as well. It just creates a nice effect to kind of blend both the images together. But another thing with the kind of film contrast I added in, you can see it kind of changes the color of the white. And I found that that's kind of a unique thing to do. It doesn't keep it completely white. It kind of adds a little bit more of a warm tone to it. So definitely experiment with adding some color correction above both images to kind of give you a nice blend. And if you need to pull the white levels down, you can do that at that point. So here's a preview of the final rendered shot. And I went ahead and also added in some kind of digital glitch effects on top of that. Alright guys, hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial and picked up some tips on how to create your own double exposure images using 3D models in After Effects or the 3D program of your choice. I'm Charles Jaeger for Tuts Plus. Thanks for watching.